College. She has had a long and distinguished career as a politician, first as leader of Islington Council, then as an MP for Barking, and now as a member of the House of Lords. She has always been interested in public education and cultural policy, as her ministerial career shows. Today, she's going to talk about the review she wrote last year about that venerable organisation, the British Council, which was founded in 1934 and works in over 100 different countries to promote cultural relations and educational opportunities and the use of the English language. I believe she was forthright and critical in her review, as well as giving some positive recommendations about how the British Council should be shaped for the future. Dame Margaret Hodge, we look forward to your talk about the British Council.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me? Are the acoustics working? Brilliant. Can I start by saying I'm really, really pleased to be with you. I'm a great, great admirer of iu3a and a great supporter. I think you're a force for optimism. Every time I speak to the iu3a audience, I come away thinking, God, what energy, knowledge, and really also what inquiring minds you have. So I'm a bit petrified about the questions you're going to ask me. When I finally retire, I hope I'll be a member of the audience. I just want to say to Antonia, I'm not talking about the British Council, I'm talking about the Arts Council in England. Sadly, the British Council has completely walked away from funding arts in Britain or art abroad, which is a tragedy. I felt really privileged to be asked by Lisa Nandy and the government to undertake a review of the Arts Council. And that the Arts Council is the body that is responsible for all, really most of the public funding that goes into the arts across England. It is just a responsibility of England. I've always been a passionate supporter of the arts and spend as much of my spare time as I can going to theatres, music, opera, art galleries and all of that. I was Minister for Culture in the last few years of the Blair Brown Labour government, which was the most stunning job, because you've got to go through everything. And I was until I started this review when it created a conflict of interest. I was chair of Theatre Royal Stratford East, which some of you will remember was Joan Littlewood's old theatre, where I remember going as a student and going to see Oh What a Lovely War and all those wonderful theatre productions that she put on. So that was my background for it. The importance of arts and culture to us all, I think, is unrivaled, really. It's a way that we express our feelings, our passions, our loves, our hates, our fears, all our emotions and all our thoughts. And whether we do that through music, through song, through opera, through dance, through theatre, through visual arts, they're all incredibly powerful experiences that we can all relate to. It's also the way we tell stories about ourselves, about our history, about who we are, about the current challenges facing us in society, about our identity, about our culture, and it helps us both understand ourselves and understand others better than we do. And it encourages the young people in schools and universities absolutely crucial skills that actually will become ever more important, I think, with AI. Because it helps people develop their creative skills, it helps them develop their imagination, it helps them think laterally, and it helps them work together as groups as well. So I think it's vitally important. And I've got two quotes that I often use. Picasso said, "Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life." I love that one. And Degas said, "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see." Arts and culture are also vital for the economy. In themselves, they contribute and add value to the economy. They help our very successful tourism industry, and most importantly, they contribute to the creative industry sector, which generated in 2023 £124 billion added value to the UK economy. It's one of our fastest growing sectors. It's central to this government's industrial strategy. It employs nearly 2.5 million people, and it wouldn't exist if we didn't have the talent, the knowledge, and the outputs of those who work in the arts and cultural sector. So that's why it's important. But despite all that, the UK public investment in the arts and culture is pathetic. We only put 0.25% of our GDP is invested in culture. Philanthropic giving is very low. It's a half of 1%. You compare that with a GDP, compare that with America, where it's 1.5%, nearly 1.5%, so way behind others. And just to put some focus on this, Berlin spends on arts and culture £525 million a year. The Arts Council of England, ACE, spends on its major programme, which is the 40 organisations, the National Programme of Organisations. It spends on that portfolio £458.5 million, so less than Berlin does in just one city in Germany. And the Mayor of London, although committed to arts and culture, only spends £18.7 million. So the difference, you can tell that with concerts and operas and everything if you go to any of those cities in Germany. And then between 2010 and 2022, Arts Council of England had 13% real terms cut in expenditure, whereas if you look at Germany, they increased spending on culture and the arts by 33%, France by 27%, Belgium by 40%. And most important, a lot of arts funding comes from the Arts Council, but it also comes from local authorities. And local authorities, since 2010, have cut their investment in the arts by 50%, nearly 50%. Some authorities have cut it completely. So it was against that background of really lack of investment in the arts that I undertook the review of the Arts Council. It has had its own cuts. It used to have 9 areas around the country from which it operated. It's cut that to 5. So, for example, if you look at what's called the South East Area Office of ACE, ACE is the Arts Council of England, so I can put ACE in front. That covers the South East Area Office, covers Norfolk and Surrey, right through to Buckinghamshire. It's completely mad to have a real connection to the locality with that wide area of responsibility. We talked to 700 stakeholders in the period of the review. It was I had to try and do it quickly, reported just before Christmas, and it was all sorts of stakeholders. And what I came back with was there is an absolute passion within the sector, those who work in the sector, to strive to do their best to contribute the most and to see a flourishing cultural and arts sector in the UK. But what I also found, and that was probably the reason that I was asked to do the review, that there had been a loss of confidence in the Arts Council itself. It's become incredibly bureaucratic. I know this from chairing Stratford East, when you put your application form in, it's that big. And although I was chair of the theatre, therefore I had ultimate responsibility for submitting the application, I never read it. You're a voluntary chair, you can't go through it, you have to depend on your executive director to read it. And it's really become a tick box exercise. And furthermore, then the monitoring is also a nightmare. They ask for masses of data, far too much data. And that whole system was felt by people I talked to stifle the very innovation and creativity which ought to be the central focus of any funding body and how it distributes money to the arts. It's become very much a command and control organisation, very focused. The centre decides what everybody should do. The staff spend their time on this bureaucratic dealing with the bureaucracy created by both the application process and the monitoring process, rather than in the old days what they used to do was support organisations, if they faced particular challenges, all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is, people said to me that ACE doesn't fulfill its role as a development agent. That means it should be convening people to think about how can we increase philanthropy, how do we respond to the AI challenges, and how that will impact on culture and the arts. And it sort of sees itself much more as a funder, not as a developer. I should say they responded this morning to my review and accepted all my recommendations, so hopefully this is the beginning of a period of change. And what I came back and concluded is we do want an arts council. We do want a body separate from government that actually is responsible for distributing money to the arts. We thought that's important. And then the other thing was that there is a principle when the Arts Council was established by JE that there should be what's called the arm's length principle. So politicians should not get involved in the decisions as to who should get the money and how much they get and how it should be distributed. That principle was undermined by Nadine Dorris, in particular, when she was Secretary of State for Culture, which led, some of you might have seen the publicity and campaigns, which led to the cut of the funding for the English National Opera, ENO, and trying to force them out to Manchester, which I still don't think will work. And that led to a complete, I think a real loss of confidence in the sector about political interference in the arts. As I went round the place, all the newly elected mayors wanted me to give them the money. They thought they should distribute it. But I took the decision that that was not right. I don't think I made them very happy. Not just because you wanted to be arms of reform, but I think it's whatever, people, if you give it to a politician, they'll fund the things that they really want to fund, rather than taking a much more objective view of the organisations and bodies and individuals that should be funded. And that whole arm's length principle is absolutely crucial as a safeguard to ensure that creativity is not stifled. So my second recommendation was that not only should we retain the arm's length principle, but it should be strengthened. If I'd been a member of the Arts Council when Nadine Dorris gave that instruction to take money out of London, I'd have said no. I think they should have all resigned and really made a great song and dance about it. And it's left a legacy. It contributed really to that legacy of distrust in the organisation. So I said there's lack of money. I also know that the Chancellor is not going to increase the funding directly of the Arts Council. So I'm trying to take a more creative view of how you can get more money into the arts. And I try to be pragmatic. Now, one of the things that has worked really well is the tax credit system. So that theatres, for example, if they put on a new production, can claim tax credit for it, for the cost of the production. And that has brought a lot of money into theatres. It's brought nearly £900 million a year. That is a lot of money. It's another way of getting it in. The reason it works as a complete government financial accounting system is if it's a tax credit, it means you don't get the tax income in that you were expecting, and that's below the line. So it doesn't count as expenditure, and therefore it's much easier to increase credits that you get through not securing taxation, because it's below the line. Therefore, it doesn't show as the government increasing expenditure. It's a completely technical issue, but it was one that I think is really important. Theatre tax relief is nearly 900. Orchestra tax relief gets 164 million pounds a year. That takes to the orchestras. And museums and galleries get an exhibition tax relief if they put on new exhibition, and that brings them about 115 million pounds. So I've suggested that we bring in a new tax relief for touring. And touring is incredibly important because we're very lucky here in London. We do have, there's never enough time to go and see all the fantastic exhibitions, theatre productions, music that is on offer to us across the capital. But there are lots of areas in the country which are underserved areas. And the way a lot of if you want that available to you, you've got to do it through people touring. And when there are cuts in funding, the first thing that the RSC will do, or maybe the National Theatre will do, all these people will do, is cut their touring activity. So we went to one theatre in a really rural area, which was entirely dependent on touring, and was finding that it was really difficult to find companies who would come and put on productions there. Why? Because the cost of travel's gone up, because the cost of Airbnb has gone up. So all those things, I think we could introduce a touring tax relief, which would bring more money into the system. And help our orchestras. Since Brexit, another Brexit result, the orchestras have to they have to get permits to go over, there's much more form filling, all that sort of stuff. And orchestras going around those with the Berlins of Europe, not only are they popular, lots of people go to those concerts, but they're money earners, they make money out of it, and that's money that they can then invest to subsidise our cultural office here in the UK. So I want to bring in, extend the orchestra tax relief to cover, again, the costs of travel and the extra costs of getting permits and visas and all that sort of stuff. And there's a slight thing as well that HMRC are really slow in distributing tax reliefs. And that means quite often, because all these organisations are operating on the edge, that they have to borrow money in the hope that the tax relief will finally come in, so we can bring it up. The next thing I wanted to do was, at the moment, the Arts Council can't trade, hasn't got a trading arm, and it's governed by a Royal Charter, so you need a change in the Royal Charter to enable it to trade. And what I want that to do is that where you get a successful production developed in the public sector, the subsidised sector, like War Horse or like Matilda, all these things, I think that when it goes on and is a success in the commercial sector, just a little bit of that should come back to the Arts Council for them to reinvest into new projects. And they can't do that if they haven't got a trading arm. So I'm also recommending that they should establish a trading arm and that we should have negotiations with the private sector so that either you do it through the profits and percentage of the profits, or you do it through royalties. There any mechanism that you could use to do it. The other thing is, how do we increase philanthropy in the UK? So it's quite interesting there that 2/3 of the philanthropy that goes into the arts and culture comes to London and the South East. And again, those underserved areas outside London and the South East, it's very, very difficult to attract money. So why don't we double the gift aid? So if you give outside London, outside the M25, you just get double the gift aid. See if that works. I don't know if it works as an incentive, but what we do know is in France, they've introduced a new law which allows tax reliefs of up to 60% for corporations, and that has quadrupled the philanthropic investment by corporations into the arts and culture. I think we could do something along the line. When you talk to these very rich philanthropists, the other thing they all want a god. I don't think you can buy more gods, but you could have a King's Medal or something like that in recognition of your contribution to the arts, something that recognises that you have done something. The other thing is that capital is absolutely desperate. All these organisations are desperate for capital investment. A lot of them listed buildings, the last time they got, it's a very interesting observation, that the last time that there was a lot of capital investment was actually with the last Labour government, and we did invest a lot of culture in the arts. So all the lifts and the boilers and all that sort of stuff is now needs replacing, and there just isn't any money for it. So partly if you can establish this trading arm, you may be able to raise some capital through private sector. But the other thing that I've found, British Council is completely pulled out of the arts, but there's an organisation called Nesta, which was given a £250 million amount of money by the last Labour government to invest in arts and culture as well as other issues. And they've just pulled out of arts and culture completely. So I think £250 million should now be given to the Arts Council for them to invest. And finally, two things. A tourism levy. I don't think this government at this point in time will want a new tax. And there are some authorities that are now allowed to raise a little bit of money locally in a sort of tourism way, but actually the way they use it then is for cleaning the streets and putting in street furniture rather than investing in culture and the arts. And you can see why they do that. But I think if we could have a real tourism levy with a specific duty for that to go to the arts, that would be brilliant. And the final, more controversial issue, which I think DCMS are going to look at, is that we have this free access to museums. And I think that's absolutely right and proper and fine for British, for UK citizens. But we could look at whether that is appropriate for foreign tourists when they come to Britain. That would have been easy when I was thinking about this if we had universal introduction of ID cards. That's going to be much more difficult if we don't have that. But that would be an idea. Now, so that was the money side of it, trying to be inventive. Of course, what Treasury had come back and said, we can only do that at the time of the budget, because I talked to them before Christmas, before actually Rachel did the last budget, said, can't you put some of these things in, I'm going to recommend them to you. Oh no, we can't, we've got to respond to your arts review. So fingers crossed, and I don't know pressure, that some of them may lead to changes in the next budget. Then we come to what else I looked at. So this funding model that they've currently got is ghastly. Not only is it hugely bureaucratic, but it's built around a strategy that's called Let's Create. And the point of Let's Create was to increase diversity in the arts world and to ensure that arts was available to more people in underserved areas. All very good and legitimate objectives, but it's stifled creativity because you've got to show how many people from various communities attended your efforts, even if you're sitting somewhere like Cumbria, where there's probably a pretty white community there, so that's a bit dark. It also shows that you've got to show how much training you do. And what that various training organisations or educational training said to me, that is daft, because we're very good at it, others aren't, but to tick the Arts Council box, you have to demonstrate some capability there, even though it's not very effective. And the whole thing was that it then became an exercise in shoveling money into underserved areas without thinking about the excellence or the contribution, the actual quality of the art and culture that was on offer. It was much more about just make sure you're in there rather than is what you're doing, really adding to the whole offer of arts and culture to our community. And you saw that a little bit. You remember Wigmore Hall pulled out of funding from the Arts Council because they thought it was too bureaucratic and too constrained and too top down. And the other thing I should just say about it, all the big organisations now have staff to fill in these ruddy forms, and the smaller organisations go to consultants. There's a new army of consultants that have sprung up, and they too have those consultancies exist to help you fill in the forms. And that's all Arts Council money, a terrible waste of money that simply goes on applications and monitoring. And I had this one conversation with a woman in Bristol who had run a community arts project for years and years and years and had been a national portfolio organisation for years and years and years in the Arts Council programme. And then she'd been run up on a Monday night to be told that she was going to be cut on Tuesday morning. She never saw anybody from the Arts Council to support her through that change. She was in absolute panic because it was a third of her income. So she went into a panic and she said, when finally she got through it and just started to think about how she was going to manage the organisation going forward, she felt liberated. Now, if the council that funds you is so constrained that you feel liberated, they stop funding you. That's not a very good thing. And another one of the big organisations said to me, I can't stand it. I only get to page 36 in the application form, and they start asking me what I put on the stage. So the whole concept of what was being offered is wrong. So, I think they should change it. I think they should scrap the existing system, and you should be able to apply to the Arts Council based on your USP. What will you give to the Arts Council that will help our whole offer, national offer on the arts? And you should set your own KPIs. So I want to be judged on, my contribution that I make, and I think that would be a really much more powerful thing. So you're based on your creativity. You're not based on these rather sort of top-down criteria that the Arts Council use. I think then you should be judged. There used to in the past be panels for each art form that advise the Arts Council on whether or not to support a particular application. I think you should bring those back, so you are really judged by your peer group, experts in the field, who will say, is this a worthwhile project or organisation that you want to support? And then, what I also think is that it's absolutely crazy that we have to apply every 3-4 years, and anybody who's involved in an arts organisation knows you're planning 5-6 years ahead. So I think there should be a longer period in which you're convinced that you're certain of your funding. And then finally, if you're going to lose your funding, you shouldn't be told on Monday evening of a decision to be taken on a Tuesday morning. You should be having a close relationship with the Arts Council so that you're aware of when you're failing, aware of what they're worried about, and you should not know really that your Arts Council funding should go. So that would be my new model, and I think they're going to do it, fingers crossed. The other thing is, how do you tackle this fact that some areas are really underserved? I mean, Lisa Nandy, anybody who's seen on telly or heard her ring, will bang on about her own constituency, Wigan, where there is really hardly anything on offer. So part of that will be because if we can get the Tory right. But what I've suggested is that the national body should only look at national organisations. There'll be an argument for what's national and what not. And the rest should go to local boards. And although the Arts Council has got 5 areas, and we don't want to increase that, you can set up local boards which are coterminous with the local authority boundaries, the new boundaries. And there, you could set up a board which is not full of local councillors and local mayors. They can be on there, but it should be full of local artists, really, community representatives who will know what they want in their area, and then people from education. I'll come to education in a minute, I don't know what you want, and also from health. So they bring together all of those who've got an interest in arts, and they take the decision as to what we fund locally. And I think that would be a much better bottom-up way of ensuring that the offer that is local works locally. I hope there'll be extra money from philanthropy. They accept my recommendation on that. And the other thing I want to do is something that I picked up from a visit to Norfolk. There are lots of artists all over the country that live in these underserved areas. So in Norfolk we found a theatre maker, a theatre maker who worked from her kitchen. We found somebody who put on dance, working again from her home to do that. Somebody who did creative writing, working from a bookshop. They're there. They're just not identified and sponsored and supported. So I think what we should do is have in these underserved areas a couple of people employed by the Arts Council who are sort of community arts workers, and they go and identify the local artistic talent in that area, bring them together with the schools, with the community organisations, and build bottom up. We did something similar as a Labour government. We had what we call creative partnerships. Some of you may remember them. And there again, we put in just 1 or 2 local community workers who did just that, bringing them into schools. I'm suggesting that is extended to cover areas. And what Arts Council has done to date is force organisations out of London, like the EMA, So the English Tory outlook, for example, has had to move to Sheffield, the Poetry School has moved to Leeds, the Britten Symphonium has moved, I think, to Cambridge. But they don't really do anything in Cambridge, all their people work in London. And it's really just been a postcode, again, tick box, which pretends that you're increasing the offer in underserved areas, and you're not really doing that. So that's the next thing. Next thing I looked at was individuals. If you look at the people who work in the arts and culture, 70% of them are freelancers. It's a massive, which means you've got the insecurity, you don't have terms and conditions, you get holiday pay, you've got no pension, all those sort of things. If you're off sick, you don't get anything. And nearly 80% of people working in the culture and arts sector are thinking of leaving, partly because of the pressure, partly because of the money. And if you look at the income that they have, if you're a visual artist in 2024, the median income of somebody doing in that field was $12,500 annual income. And if you compare that to minimum wage now is just about, I'm just probably about to go up in April, it's about 24,000, just under 24,000. So median income just in one of the art forms was almost half, was just over half of what minimum wage is across there. So actually, what happened there, the ACE does support individuals. It does it through, you can apply for projects, or you can provide particular training, but it's a bit one-off, it's very bureaucratic, all the arguments again. So I had an interesting conversation with Anthony Gormley, who doesn't actually come from a very disadvantaged background. But when he started off, he got 5,000 quid from the Arts Council and a mentor. So I thought, why don't we bring that back? So my suggestion is that we could do it immediately with the monies available to them. That you open a national programme for individuals. We could fund 500 in the first year, and they get 30,000 each, and they get a mentor. And that, I think, would give people from, my daughter's, one of my daughters is a director, but we were able to say to her in her first year, we'll fund, we'll sub you if you don't get any money. She did actually earn enough money to provide, but we were there to sub her. If you come from a more disadvantaged background, you don't have that advantage. So I think this programme, focused on people from disadvantaged backgrounds, focused on underserved areas, could do a heck of a lot to ensure that we get a good pipeline of new people coming in. So that's another of my things. My final thing, and then I will stop, is education. Undergo the whole of cultural education in schools was completely destroyed. Terrible for me because I was an education minister in the Blair Brown years, and worked with David Maliband to develop this Every Child a Musician, Every Child a Theatre Girl. But we never got it all over the country. But I just remember going to a school in Town Hamlets where they were doing the Every Child a Musician, which meant every child in the primary school had a year where they had access to orchestral instruments. And we went into this class, an 8 or 9-year-olds, and there was this little kid, black kid, with a double bass, up there, strumming away and bopping up and down. And I thought, if there's just one child in this group for whom that actually opens doors into new opportunities, this is worthwhile. So that's all been destroyed. And my last year's embarking, I was obviously visiting the primary school, and it was rare to find a primary school where they didn't get, they weren't using, music that was piped into the classroom. There was nobody there who could play an instrument in the classroom to support the children through that. My final thing on that was I had responsibility for Shore Staff when I was an education minister. And one of the things I did was go and visit Switzerland, who have a very good early years offer. And the interesting thing is the only compulsory element in the nursery offer, the early years offer in Switzerland, is music. So there has to be somebody in that group, in the teacher group, who is a musician. And the reason they do that is it helps children develop models and forms and all that sort of stuff, and helps them develop the skills they need to learn. So we want to bring all that back. I could finish, just to finish. what we also want to do, there's a lot of philanthropic money around for education. And I think if we're going to bring it together, the number of children who now don't go to museums because the school can't afford a bus, and the children, of course, who don't get any access to music because there's nobody on the staff to do it, I think we could raise lots and lots, hundreds of millions that way. And so I'm hoping that they will set up a joint fund between DFE. So that's some of the things we're doing. It's a huge agenda. The government's published its response today. I just had a quick look at it, and it seems accept. So, you know, with a bit of luck, they have accepted most of my recommendations. But the proof of the pudding will be eating. Will they implement it? There's a new chair coming in to the Arts Council. They're just recruiting now. My passion will remain there. I'll keep a vigilant eye on how it goes. But I hope to goodness they do succeed. Thank you.
Thank you for a really inspiring talk about the Arts Council, and I do apologise that I misread Barbara's information in WOW, that I thought it was the British Council, but thank you. Now we have questions. Who would like to ask some questions? There's one gentleman in the front here.
Thank you very much for the talk, fascinating. But isn't the basic problem in Britain is that we're not interested enough in the arts? If you look at somewhere like Germany, there's a tremendous amount of sponsorship comes from the cities and from individuals. And I just, you know, there are obviously hotspots of enthusiasm in Britain, particularly obviously in London, and, you know, the big famous companies. But somehow it's thinly spread in Britain, and the Arts Council is there to compensate for that. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's there to partner. I wouldn't say compensate. I would say it's there to partner with that. There are problems. Corporations have pulled out. There's been some reputational issues about, if you think about Hay Festival, for example, that was various other festivals where they're going to fund them. I think I do put recommendations in that. I think the Arts Council should develop a very tough strategy on that so that we don't lose all that corporation money. I think what we're trying to do is make it more appealing to both corporations and individuals to contribute. And I think that, you said the residents are not interested. I don't think that. I think they get offered it. Even what is seen as very elitist. If you talk to the Royal Opera House, and they do a lot of work around bringing children in just for particular productions, it does inspire them. If you could have every child a musician, every child a theatre, I think that would change very quickly people's perception and enjoyment of the arts and their commitment to it and their desire to participate in it. So I think it's there. I think we've just got to unlock it.
Okay, any more questions? At the back there, please. And then anyone from this side? Afterwards, this lady in the fourth row.
Yeah,
I can't hear.
No, I can't hear. Could you use your microphone, please?
yeah, I was using it. Yeah, sort of perhaps a link to the gentleman who's just spoken. It sounds as though there's kind of a perma-crisis in arts provision, sort of in the provinces. And I found your comment just now very interesting. Maybe it's not that people aren't interested, they need exposure to it, and I very much agree with that. So I'm thinking, is it possible, or does it exist at the moment, that there's kind of a link or a condition on Arts Council funding for probably larger recipients, that somebody from the provinces who's shown an interest or has a relationship to the arts should be allowed to observe, the production of something? Might that be a way of both increasing the actual presence of the arts in the provinces and giving people confidence? Because, to do something well, you need to know how to do it. It's just a thought. Is there something like that?
I mean, that's another idea which I think would be worth exploring. So people who are just interested, you see, or people who contribute. But people who contribute. I mean, I think if you contribute, just thinking of how we dealt with our philanthropists in Stratford East, and it was very tough. There we were, sitting with Canary Wharf across the piece, in a very, very, very beautiful Grade 2 listed building, but trying to get any of the Canary Wharf people to invest any money in Stratford East was impossible. And also the population in Guild has changed a lot. It's very, very hard to track them. So I think most organisations, if you give to them, you get something back. So you do already, that does exist. Unless I'm certain, it's quite difficult to hear. Are you finding it?
This is very hard to hear.
Yeah.
Could you stand up when you speak and be a little clearer?
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
when I actually sort of said yes, contribute, I meant contribute artistically or contribute to the effort locally. Perhaps, I don't know, in Northumbria, somebody who's trying to set something up. Maybe there could be some kind of mentorship deal where a large arts council funded body would agree to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I mean, I think there is a bit of that. I mean, that already exists, but it is actually, again, in my report, that for the large organisations, they should have a responsibility for supporting the pipeline, which is what you already said. So I think that should be strengthened. So, National Theatre do a heck of a lot, but social, the RSC do a heck of a lot. Every organisation of that, those bigger organisations. I don't think the Almeida do, actually. It's quite interesting. They're big enough, although I can't remember whether they got completely cut or not. But they should nevertheless contribute in some way back to supporting us. And the other thing we talk about is artists in residence, so that people who are starting on the journey and trying to create a career could help, for example, in schools, give them extra experience, and likewise be helped and supported by organisations. I completely agree with that.
Okay, there's someone in the third row here, please. And then this lady over there afterwards.
I just wanted to support the British Council. I retired from the British Council 20 years ago, having worked 10 years as PA to the Director of Visual Arts. And I just have to say, the work that we did overseas, especially, we created up to 60 exhibitions a year, and there was a package, and the venues we went to often were very, very small, but the package was education in the area, a catalogue, and it was wonderful. And I'm very sorry to hear that you feel that it's falling by the way. A question though, with the advance of AI, do you think a lot of individual artists, and I'm talking about musicians and so on, will be put off because they might feel that their actual work is being undermined?
I mean, first of all, I agree with you entirely. I think it's a tragedy that the British Council has pulled out of working on culture and the arts. And I think it's fantastic, valuable, really good soft power. Not just valuable in itself, but very good soft power for Britain in the exhibitions that it was. So you did a fantastic job. It's a tragedy that no longer exists. I think we're all a bit scared of AI, but my own view, when I've thought about this in relation to the arts, I think all the creativity, you will still need to be creative, you will still, all those skills that come from artistic performance and endeavour, I think will become more valuable with AI. Let's see whether I'm right or wrong, but that's my sort of optimistic take on it. And I think we'll still, if you think every change is always, I remember thinking when videos came in, we'd never go to cinema again. And yet we are. And you can say exactly the same when, you now can get everything on social media and things. You still want to go to the theatre, you still want to go. Live performances are now the way in which a lot of artists, singers, and they make their money. So I remain optimistic, and I think the skills that people have in the cultural arts sector will actually become more important over time with AI rather than probably less important.
Okay, Rachel, the lady next to you there. Could you stand up when you ask your question?
Thank you.
Keep it short.
First of all, I'm so cheered up by what you say, having been extremely depressed, so thank you for that. If the government accepts half of what you say, we're on a roll. But I wonder, in your discussions with the Arts Council itself and its staff, what impression you've got about its capacity to change and adapt in this way. I mean, there have been fundamental misunderstandings, as you said, between excellence and spread. There's a new chairman coming in, but does the board need wholesale change? And presumably, I don't know the Arts Council, but there are a lot of perfectly dedicated and knowledgeable staff, but are they the right staff? Do they need supplementing and changing?
I think the appointment of a new chair is absolutely critical to the success of the implementation of these recommendations. And what I would say is I met a lot of people that, in the organisation that were gasping for change. And really, so that within the organisation itself, there is that. I think the leadership has got to take a different view. So if it doesn't, I think there may be some lip service to a lot of what I recommend, but not proper implementation. So I think there's got to be a complete change in the leadership direction from the top. But underneath it, there are some really great people who are really, really desperate to do the sort of things. And excellence, when I went to the meeting of the Arts Council board, excellence is almost a word they won't use. Because it was seen as somehow being against all the diversity principles. And for me, as being spending my life fighting racism and trying to get equality in our society, it's just a complete misinterpretation of how you pursue those objectives.
Okay, it's too late, yes, but could you stand up and then keep it short?
You talked about the tick box culture in which organisations have to participate. Every time I go to an exhibition, an opera, a concert, whatever, I am emailed to give my tick box answers. So some of the questions seem to be totally ridiculous. Am I helping any organisation by saying I'm white British, over the age of 75, blah, blah, blah? Should I pretend to be Romany or something else? Would it help the organisation if I simply lied?
You're quite right. I think they are going to do this. I think this will happen, whatever happens. They collect a huge amount of data. They don't use it. I wouldn't mind so if they used it to some good effect. Part of it is the Arts Council. I think part of it is DCMS, Department of Culture, and part is the Treasury. So they're all at fault. They all put in their demands. I mean, one of my other recommendations is quite a lot of organisations get funded by the Arts Council, may get some money from English Heritage or other DCMS bodies. Why don't they have just one application for all those bodies and one set of KPIs that they've got to meet? So I've said review the whole running lot, think about what you really need and want, and then collect it. And then if you do, publish it and use it. Because I would go around organisations who have no idea about the data itself. They've got 48 directors in the Arts Council. And I met the one who was doing philanthropy, and I thought, my God, if I'd known you existed, you might have helped me when I was at Stratford East. But I never even knew she existed at the time, so goodness knows what she was spending her time doing.
Well, there was a person behind the last question as well. Could you stand up?
Thank you. Yes, you've given me some optimism as well. The Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment is based in a school just up the road, and I wondered if there was any sort of encouragement for that model, because it just seems inspired.
I think it's brilliant. And I do talk about it, saying that that should be one that could be easily replicated around. I think it's completely and utterly brilliant model. I mean, it integrates the music of that into the curriculum and into the after school activities. Brilliant. It's completely brilliant.
Okay, on this side, are there any questions? That person there, and then this lady in the front. Thank you.
I chaired for some years a art centre in Stoke-on-Trent. Now, we now no longer get government money, get some money from grants, but we thrive because of film.
Because of
Films.
Films.
And films in their own right, but films like film screening of the Royal Opera House, etc. And the way that film plays a role in encouraging and bringing in new people is vital. Did you explore the fact that the Arts Council doesn't support film? It's done by the Film Institute. And I think that's a big drawback to the development of arts, anyway.
Yeah, it's one of the absurdities that historically films get funded under the BFI, although they sit in the same office. They actually share a building. The Arts Council and the BFI are in the same building. So you think, why the hell aren't they working more closely together? And that would be, if they accept my recommendation about if you go for grants for different, let's at least get the DCMS bodies working together. If we can get them working together, and that would include film, then at least you might make some sense about maximising the impact of the limited funding that is available. Yeah.
Yes, this lady in the front row. Thank you. And could you stand up? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, which was absolutely fascinating. I'm interested in the measly pot of money that the Arts Council actually gets to do all this compared with other countries. And I wonder what you thought of various ways of levying a tourist tax, you know, whether that's domestic tourism or foreign tourism. I mean, now when you go abroad, very often you're paying a hotel tax, you know, a couple of euros a night kind of thing, to offset the expenses that tourists bring to a place. Or I don't know about a foreign tourist tax, it's more difficult to implement. But I wondered what you thought of those as possibilities, just to increase the overall size of the pot, because there isn't going to be any more coming from the Treasury element, I thought.
I'm really keen. Treasury is not keen on new taxes, and unless we don't frame it in the proper way. I mean, this government is very keen on localism, so if you do have some sort of tourist or local, I think Manchester's got it, somewhere else, Liverpool's got it. When they do get those taxes, if you allow the local authorities then to take the decisions of where to spend it, they will just spend it on street cleaning and street furniture, because that's their priority. So I think you have to devise it in a way, model it, that ensures that money goes to arts and culture. But it's an obvious way of increasing revenue for the arts. It's an obvious way, but it's just at the moment.
There's one other person there in the middle at the back. Could you stand up, please, so that Alison can find you? Could you stand up? There. Okay.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Margaret. It was really great to come to a talk that gave us some substance, some detail, and some direction for the future that's based on optimism. But I'd like to take exception to what the last person said and ask you not to, I was rather surprised to hear that the notion that foreign tourists would have to pay to go into our museums and art galleries. I think that is completely negative, counterproductive to what foreign tourists and divisive. I'd like to know why you think it's a good idea. Because you had so many other good ideas, and I have to say, as recently, I was in Norwich and I saw an RSC production of Hamlet, which was fantastic. I saw Wayne McGregor, a production of Red Shoes and Dance from Sadler's Wells. There are good things that are happening. It's about accelerating it in the way that you're suggesting and providing incentives. But please, please don't let's get division for foreign tourists going to museums.
Well, you could do it through a tourism tax. I don't know if you're against that too. Nice to see you again. I think most countries have a tourism tax, you know. Most countries do, with the exception we're not the rule. So why am I for it? I think it's for that reason alone. And it's another way of getting money into culture and the arts. On the issue of charging of foreign tourists when they go to our museums, I was very clear on that you could only consider it, and I didn't recommend it, I think consider it, if we had universal ID cards. So there was a simple way of showing demonstrators that you were a UK citizen, and therefore access to it. Now we've been that idea, I don't think it's a runner, and I think what I think there is pressure from Treasury to investigate this. I mean, it's peanuts, I know, it is actually peanuts. And I hope that the evidence they gather will demonstrate it's just not worth the hassle. But I think if we got to the position where we had universal ID cards, we might then consider it. We might, you know, I know it's just, I'd love to say the best way to do it is just increasing the budget of the Arts Council. I can't see that being realistic over the coming period. So it's sort of struggling around to look at other ways of bringing more money into arts and culture.
We have time for 2 more questions. Can we have one from this side, this lady in the 4th row? And then from the other side, who would like to raise their arm for the next question? You? Okay, right.
Thanks a lot for your talk. This is a bit of a delicate question. I'll try to phrase it delicately. I've worked in arts education, arts organisation in education for a very long time, and I constantly got the impression that the DCMS is not a very sort of highly thought of part of highly thought of part of a ministerial career. You might want to sort of quite past that. But I did feel, I mean, compared to the position of the Minister of Education in France, for example, it's quite a different kind of image. If you're able to comment on that, do. If you can't, I shall understand.
Well, when I was the Minister for Arts and Culture, I think it was the best job in government, actually. I loved it. So, although I was loving my children's minister job, so that was also very satisfying. It doesn't have the status. It doesn't have the status, and it's bonkers. Even in terms, if you want to look at growth, is the contribution that arts and culture make to creative industries, which is just one of our success stories in the UK. We ought to be nurturing and expanding it. But there are people there who love it. They can't, I mean, I was there with James Purnell, I don't know if some of you remember it, and it was the first year of the cuts after the 2008 financial disaster. And because we were such a small budget in relation to the massive total government budget, I just said, we both said we're not going to settle until they protect our budget. And by being bullshit about it, we managed to hang on. So there was an advantage of being a small department. They needed our okay in the end. By just refusing to settle, we didn't get a cut in those days. I always suggest to Lisa that she does a similar thing if there are public expenditure cuts out. It isn't well regarded, and it's crazy. But creative industries is now part of the industrial strategy, so that there is an understanding of how important that is. And I think that growth and understanding of the contribution cultural arts makes to that. I should say one thing I didn't say. One of our recommendations, which has been accepted and was enacted in legislation that's just gone through, is all local authorities will have now to produce a culture strategy. And that is brilliant, because that will make them think about it, even if they, and then they might think about bringing their money back in.
Bob, did you want to ask a question?
Yes. Margaret, thanks very much for a fascinating talk, really interesting. One quick question. You mentioned one of your recommendations was to introduce a trading arm. And I'm curious as to whether you feel that may risk prices going up as a consequence, and if so, what controls that you plan to put in place to prevent that?
Well, all I want is a little bit of what they're making, actually. And I did talk to somebody, I mean, I think, there is pressure on the whole sector at the moment because costs are going up, and actually prices for some, it always, prices to go to some things are ridiculously expensive. I've tried to take my grandkids to Oliver, and it's just a huge amount of money. You're paying, sure you know that. So we wouldn't control prices. So I just want a little bit of either the profits over a certain percentage or over the, there are various mechanisms you can use, which will be a tiny bit back. I don't think that's too greedy. I think if the Arts Council was responsible for the funding that created a show that was then commercially successful, it is logical that some money should come back. It's just logical. They'll just have to absorb it.
Okay, anyone still want to ask a question? Where's the microphone? Okay, I think, is the lady here? And then that's the last one. Would you stand up?
Thank you very much. As a former museum professional director in Germany and in Italy, I found your point about reducing the number of politicians on a board important, because the only metric they ever apply is visitor numbers. And so not the quality of what we did in terms of exhibitions. But I found to my horror that visitor numbers could be improved by means of advertising. So if you suppress expenditure in one area and spend it on advertising, you get those visitor numbers. So I'd like to know from you your metrics for a good performance or an achievement, let's say in the provinces or the provinces, or with smaller companies that are putting on a production. They may not be pulling in the visitors, but they may be doing good work. How do you measure that?
Well, I have to be absolutely honest, we haven't gone into that sort of detail of you know, how you then, I mean, I don't know what you think of my idea, that if they apply for funding, they should set their own KPIs. And then that should be negotiated with the Arts Council, with different sort of emphasis and expertise in there. Impact, which is what you're talking about, is obviously a key way of how do they want to measure that and show the success of it. What I find really interesting, you were in Germany, I mean, I've got a friend whose daughter now plays in orchestras in Germany. She'll go to any, you know, not particularly major town, and fill a hall with, you know, 900 people. And it's just a different, partly through education, maybe it's through advertising, I don't know what it is. There's just a different cultural norm in European countries, and we've got to think of how we can create that here. I think when people experience it, they love it, and they come back for more. So that's why this whole thing about education, getting all that reinstated, is hugely, hugely important. But you may have better ideas than I have on how you measure it.
Okay, Margaret, thank you so much for a really brilliant talk, full of fabulous suggestions, really active suggestions, which may very well be implemented pretty soon, hopefully. And please show your appreciation for a really, really great talk.